on a written authority centuries ago. You can see how religion, how evolution might have generated a same model, but by the time there was a tribe who decided that it was right to eat their children. Now, such a tribe thought it was right, but such a tribe would not persist, quite clearly, that it would be dead and extinct within a generation or so. And so ingrained into the tribes that actually do persist and have survived to the present day is a sense that, okay, maybe we shouldn't eat our children, and in a lesser extent torture. That's the way that we should look at ourselves, to see how behavior has emerged through the ability of tribes and to survive. We also have this extraordinary possessed by no other organism to reflect upon the consequences of our actions, and that is the major quality. We can see that it's best not to stab our neighbours in the back because they might stab us. Behaviour. I think that's all I need to say on that.
Well, the Quran is a remarkable book in that it was revealed in the 7th century, and yet it also speaks to 20th century in language which is accessible to people whose language speaks to modern human beings. For example, the Quran talks about the heavens when it was smoke. And today, the same word smoke is understood as a same Arabic word dukhan, which means smoke, and one can imagine a hazy appearance of the means to a modern scientist a gaseous mass, and it gels with the modern cosmology. The Quran talks about a time when the heavens and the earth were one piece before God split them asunder. A very simple way of putting it is understood by modern science with their modern cosmology, that there was a time when the heavens were smoke and a time when the heavens and earth were altogether one before God separated them. The Quran speaks about the shape of the earth, not directly, but in every clue seems to earth, and coiling is the same verb that is used for a man coiling his turban around his head, and you can imagine the head and the turban going around. Imagine the earth and the day and night going around the world, and this is precisely what happens. The Qura, which means ball in the Arabic language. No wonder early Muslim scientists already were studying the world by looking at globes, whereas in the Dark Ages in Europe, people still thought that the earth was flat. This led Houston Smith in his book, The Modern Scientists. So I've already touched upon embryology. There are a number of areas in the Quran which touches upon physical descriptions of a remarkably accurate. There is information in the Quran which could not have been known to human beings prior to modern times. So that leaves us to answer, where it come from? Could it really have come from the subconscious mind of an individual who lived 1400 years ago? I think it cannot.
I think such vague language that they are open to it. It's only when science has progressed to the point that it has made a statement about the world that the interpreters go back and say, oh yes, this can mean that. Smoke. I mean, it's quite understandable that early man would have thought of it as smoke. It's when the physicists have got to work, they say, well, what they must really have meant was that it was whatever it currently is thought to be by the physicists. So that they survive is that they are open to interpretation according to the tenets of contemporary science. I'm not surprised that the writers of the earth was round. After all, the Greeks knew that it was round. They'd actually measured its radius. The Quran was written. And so it's not at all surprising that that kind of information got into it. I'm not at all impressed if that is the kind of evidence that shows that, in fact, the Quran was written under the guidance of the Greeks.
Which are impossible to prove directly. For example, protons and molecules. Why then does Peter Atkins have such difficulty in accepting a phenomenon such as God?
Oh dear, well I think we've gone through this. You can actually see, provided that you, by seeing, you mean using instrumental techniques of the entities. Plenty of images of molecules now survive. We know that protons exist in a certain sense because we can see them in scattering experiments and so on. I've got no particular problems with that. They are entities that science requires in order to account for its observations. The idea of God is entirely different. It's entirely an invention for which there is no... Everything that happens in the world can be explained without it. If I found that I could explain the whole of chemistry without invoking a molecule, then I would have no belief in molecules. Exactly the same applies to, in my view, to belief in God.
Of course, there are many things that we conclude without having direct evidence for the things. For example, that electrons, know that they do from the effects, and Dr. Atkins is quite right. Electrons themselves require the nature of the world, the fine-tuning of the world, the fact that the world is here, and the fact that moral judgment does exist, that there is an absolute moral value that we know about, the fact that we experience God when we speak to Him, when we make Hajj, the fact that the Quran is here, all of this require that God does it. The fact of the Quran, for example, cannot be explained by citing ancient Greek learning in science, unless we can show how that learning passed on from the Greeks to the Arabs in the time when the Quran was written. On the contrary, scientists who have had a chance, Dr. Atkins admitted he didn't have a chance to do, have concluded that this information could not have come from the time in which it was written, and they have openly said it must be a revelation from God, although they themselves have not admitted belief in the religion of Islam. So we have reasons for positing the existence of God, not within science, but in addition to science.
Can I take up a point that really hasn't been discussed, which is the fine-tuning argument? There are explanations of why it seems that the world is finely tuned. I mean, one is that it is indeed an accident, and the consequences of the universe tumbling into existence with the particular mix of fundamental constants that it has led to consciousness. We can't rule out the fact that it was a lucky accident. You can't. A priori, you can't rule it out. The other possibility, and indeed this possibility is supported by modern cosmological theories, is that that there are not just a few more universes, that there are billions, perhaps trillions, perhaps an infinite number of other universes. If each of those simply tumbled into existence, seeing that one of them has a particular mix of consciousness. Now, it's much simpler to think of an infinite number of random universes than it is to think of one universe carefully designed by a creator. What science shows in this way is that you really have to be circumspect. You can't just take the easy option of looking around you saying, here's a universe, a creator behind it. And that is the circumspection that is so important in science.
If you will add to that very quickly, folks, if you think back here, we take that as the logical explanation unless we are committed to some other belief. For example, you said I ask you to roll that, and each one turns up 6. Think that perhaps the dice are fixed. I just gave you a bit far-fetched to think that, well, Shabir has been doing this up and down the country from 6s. This is a little bit far-fetched to think that we happen to be in the one room where it turns out right. Or you might think that there are many other speakers in universes. There might be multiple universes. So in the other universes we have distance, and we see everything here fine-tuned, appearing the way it is, because just to be able to observe it. If we weren't here, we wouldn't observe it. Suppose you were convicted to death by a firing squad for a crime that you didn't commit. Now imagine yourself, you're a good man firing squad of sharpshooter. Guns go off, you fall unconscious, and then you wake up and you realize you were only unconscious because of the shock of the moment, but these guys all missed. Now you might conclude that you have the fact that we are here and we are this reason to think that we do have a friend on the other side. In order to dispute this, one has to show that the dice are not fixed. So one has to examine the dice and see that they're not fixed, but you might conclude that they are fixed, and you might want to examine the dice to see if indeed they are fixed. And when you find that they are fixed, you will conclude that there is a fixer. Now Dr. Atkins and other scientists have found that the universe does have the appearance.
To Dr. Atkins, what?
I think you have to answer this at two levels. One is the cosmic purpose, and one is the personal purpose. The cosmic purpose, there isn't a cosmic purpose. There is no reason there's no teleological reason existing as far as I can see. It's, in a sense, a lucky accident. There is no purpose, despite the fact that theologians like to invent purposes for it. So on the cosmic scale, there is no purpose. Indeed, if you look into the distant future, when the universe has radiation, and all there will be dead, flat space-time. So, in due course, all our achievements will be as nothing. So cosmically, there is no purpose. Privately, personally, of course, there's a great deal of purpose. My purpose coming here this evening is, I don't know what my purpose was, basically have fun, I suppose. Try to convert you, as I said, but I was sort of forlorn hope. My purpose is to enjoy life. My purpose is to be alive, have the years it is, hope to be longer, have this gift conscious on this amazing, delightful, glorious, complex world. I don't want to waste it. And if it means exercising my brain by coming here this evening and trying to make a good meal, whatever, then I intend to do that. It's to take pleasure from being alive. That's purpose of life. But taking that glorious purpose should not thwart the aspirations of all the other people in an equal opportunity, equal aspirations to enjoy their one chance of life in the same way. That, if you like, is the germ of my morality.
Again, purpose is one of those was made. Someone might have made an invention for one purpose, and scientists can discover the purposes, but not because of doing science. Science will explain how the thing was made and how it works, but not why it was made in the first place. Now, Dr. Atkins means that we do, and the moments of purpose that we apply to our actions. But the question really is, why are we here in the fully what consciousness is? Dr. Atkins himself says no one comprehends what consciousness really is. And then he concludes saying something about our inability comprehension. We cannot why life is here, or how it even came to be here. How can we discover why it is here? If we cannot yet explain what consciousness is, how can we even discover why we have it in the first place? The question of why is a different question that can only be answered through religion, in particular the religion of Islam.
For questions of religion, I like Bertrand Russell's teapot. And then, of course, would be spent. You couldn't actually disprove that there was a teapot in orbit around Mars. Purpose is actually a teapot. The theologians propose that there is a purpose, and then ask scientists to prove that there isn't one. A really deep question that Shabir Ally touched on a moment at the start of your... In my view, and I think this is really the crucial point, and it's really been lurking behind our comments about time over again, which you may, but I think I will not. I think I would concentrate on the following. I think that why question has to be deconstructed into a chain of how questions. So where are we is not really a question, it's a kind of bundle of questions. It's like we have to say, how did we come to be here, is what that we will actually understand our nature and indeed all the great questions of being that have touched on this evening.
So I think we'll wrap it up there. But I'd like to thank both Professor Peter Atkins and Shabir Ally.
2 minutes.
Yeah. 2 minutes for conclusion.
Well, okay, 2 minutes. I'm a simpleton in the sense that I believe that simple explanations are better than complex explanations. I would like to conceivable explanation adequate. I don't believe that the statement God did it, a simple statement, is actually a very, very complex statement, heavily disguised, because it's got all the paraphernalia of what a God brought the world into being. Green science can't do it yet, but I believe it is the central, really simple explanation of the extraordinary.
Now, folks, I've argued tonight for 4. One, that science does not support atheism, but rather theism, and I've given some good arguments to show that belief in a God, and does not provide any disproof of that. 2, magisteria, 2 teaching authorities, and every human being must pay at least rudimentary effort to understanding both. 3rd, I've shown that the history of the tension and conflict between religion and science did not involve Islam, but a novel for modern scientists to appreciate Islam. I mentioned previously I'd like to also mention Dr. T.V.N. Prasad, Professor of Anatomy and the head of the Department of Anatomy and Professor of Pediatrics at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg. He concluded also that the Quran must be a revelation. Dr. Joe Lee Sims in Texas, in the College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. I would also like to mention Dr. Marshall Johnson. He's professor and chairman of the Department of Anatomy at his university, the Daniel Bow Institute, Thomas Jefferson, and so on. But finally, I'd like to mention Dr. Tejata Tejasan from the University of Chiang Mai in Thailand. At a conference discussing the correlation between science and the Quran, he became moved and say that having seen all of this, it is time, but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger.